Nandi Bear. The Nandi Bear, or composite, Kalenjin, demon, is a cryptozoological species reported from the highlands of western Kenya, in East Africa. Usually described as a shaggy, slope-back predator reminiscent of a hyena, it is widely regarded as a composite cryptid, created by the lumping together of reports describing distinct animals, both known species and genuine cryptids. Some of the cryptids or folkloric beings united under the name Nandi Bear include the aforementioned composite, the baboon-like kadowolo, and the shivuvur. Other names applied to it include Mubende beast, Nyangao, Swahili, bloody beast, and several variations on the name giant forest hyena. Most cryptozoologists regard the core Nandi Bear seen by Williams and Hicks as a single cryptid, although even this is sometimes split into two separate cryptids, a hyena-like animal and a baboon-like animal. Identities put forward for it range from misidentified hyenas to giant baboons or living short-faced hyenas or even living chalicotheres. Whatever its identity, no sightings of the Nandi Bear have been reported since the 1990s, and much of its alleged range has been deforested and transformed into farmland and towns since, though the most recent sightings emanate from regions which still have some forests. Description: although regarded as a monkey by some tribes, eyewitness sightings of the Nandi Bear uniformly describe a shaggy animal very similar to a hyena. Its size is consistently given as very high forward, 4 feet 3 inches to 4 feet 6 inches at the shoulder, nearly 5 feet high, about as high as a lion, and about 4 to 5 feet in height, and all reports note that its back slopes down from the shoulders, like a hyena. The head is said to be notably large, with unusually large and powerful jaws and teeth, and a stumpy, bear-like snout. The ears are small, very short, or small and rounded, and the tail is usually described as short and tufted or hairy, with large feet. It is frequently described as having 4 quarters, which were very thickly furred, as were all 4 legs, but the hind quarters were comparatively speaking smooth or bare, and legs that are very shaggy right down to the feet. The color of this fur is said to be tawny, gingery brown, or dark brown. Sightings: the earliest known sighting of the Nandi Bear was made by Geoffrey Williams and his cousin, with the Nandi expedition to the Uasin Gishu, in 1905, although Williams did not report the sighting until 1912. He saw the animal, which was 5 tall and sat like and looked like a bear, sitting on its haunches near Surgoit Rock. Before he could do anything, the animal shambled away with a sort of sideways canter. A spate of sightings, which introduced the Nandi Bear to the wider world, occurred during the construction of the Magadi Railway in British East Africa, principally in 1912 and 1913. The most famous sighting was that reported by railway engineer G.W. Hicks on March 8, 1913, at around 9 a.m. traveling to the railhead via motor trolley. Hicks saw what he initially took to be a hyena. It was almost on the line when I first saw it, and at that time it had already seen me and was making off at a right angle to the line. As I got closer to the animal, I saw it was not a hyena. At first, I saw it nearly broadside on. It then looked about as high as a lion. It was tawny in color, similar to a black-maned, sick, lion, with very shaggy long hair. It was short and thick-set in the body, with high withers, and had a short neck and stumpy nose. It did not turn to look at me, but loped off, running with its 4 legs and with both hind legs rising at the same time. As I got alongside it, it was about 40 or 50 yards away, and I noticed it was very broad across the rump, had very short ears, and had no tail that I could see. As its hind legs came out of the grass, I noticed the legs were very shaggy right down to the feet, and that the feet seemed large. Hicks realized afterwards that the animal was the unknown bear which had been seen and considered stopping to pursue the beast, which he could still see in the distance, before remembering that the other engineers were waiting for him. He intended to return to the spot during the return journey to examine the tracks, but they were washed away by rain. Shortly afterwards, the native servant of a Mr. Archibald claimed to have seen a very similar animal, which he said was standing on its hind legs. A subcontractor, Mr. Cavigia, had already reported seeing a very similar animal the year prior. Sightings continued into the 20th century, and in around 1914 one was reported to have been killed near Kapsawar after killing several villagers. Another example of a man-eating Nandi bear struck in that same year in an unnamed Kenyan village, where it killed a 6-year-old girl. Colonial Administrator William Hickens was dispatched to hunt the beast, and though he set up a perimeter around his tent, during the night an animal with the most awful howl he had ever heard tore down the tent and carried off Hickens' dog, leaving behind enormous clawed tracks. Hickens later wrote of the sheer demoniac horror of the beast's howl. A couple of years later, a giant hyena killed 12 cattle near Tuso, and sometime before 1936, a settler in Trans-Nzoia claimed to have been attacked by an 8-foot-tall animal like a gray polar bear which broke into his hut. Some of the latest sightings have occurred on the Kimomi Tea Estate in the Nandi Hills. In 1957 or 1958, Douglas Hutton supposedly shot 2 large, 3, hyena-like animals with sloping backs, heavy heads, short broadheads, and small ears on the estate. The bodies were laid out in the factory and seen by the staff, who later described them, before being sent to Corendon Museum, Nairobi, where they were identified as giant forest hyenas. In July 1981, some locals around the estate claimed to have seen a Nyangao, Swahili, dirty dog or bloody brute, a wild animal that was not a hyena, a baboon, or a pig, and that was described similarly to the animal shot by Douglas Hutton. Another, similar animal, described as a lion-sized, shaggy-haired giant forest hyena with large teeth, was shot elsewhere in Kenya by a big game hunter in 1962. In another 1960s incident, engineer Angus MacDonald claimed to have been chased around his hut in Kipaboos by a 7-foot-tall ape-like animal that ran bipedally and quadrupedally. The latest known sighting occurred on a road running along the base of the Nandi Escarpment in February 1998, when engineer Dennis Burnett and his wife observed a very large, shaggy, bear-like hyena. Evidence. Although the Nandi Bear's tracks have frequently been described, no known casts were ever made, and only one image exists, a rough sketch made by Fritz Schindler of a track found in mud near the Magadi Railway. Bernard Heuvelman suggested that this track was in fact 2 honey badger footprints, one superimposed over the other. As mentioned above, no less than 5 or 6 Nandi bear specimens have allegedly been shot over the years, only to disappear upon being sent to London's Natural History Museum, or, in one case, the Corendon Museum. The material thus vanished includes a skin and a skull, an entire specimen, an unknown amount of bones from 2 individuals, and the skeleton, skin, tracks, and photographs of 1 individual. Explanations. Some have suggested that the Nandi bear could be explained by spotted hyenas, Crocuta crocuta, especially erythristic, red-furred, individuals, which would supposedly be unfamiliar. However, other than the physical details, many of the Nandi bear's reported behavioral attributes are inconsistent with the spotted hyena, and Captain Hickens wrote that hyenas are so common around African villages that a villager confusing one with the Nandi bear would be like an Englishman confusing a rabbit with a fox. Although any mistaken identity other than a brown hyena is not considered a good explanation for the core Nandi bear, the shaggy animal seen by Williams, Hicks, the Huttons, etc., a number of supposed Nandi bear sightings describing very different animals can be explained by mistaken identity, as first examined by Bernard Heuvelmans and On the Track of Unknown Animals, 1955. The most notable of these are the multiple sightings, occurring in 1912, multiple times during the 1930s, and on other, undated occasions, that refer to the animal as relatively small, with black fur, and sometimes a pointed head. Bernard Heuvelmans felt that these sightings referred to the honey badger, Mellivera capensis, which sometimes turns entirely black as it grows older and larger, presenting an unfamiliar sight. Alternatively, he speculated that they might represent a much larger subspecies of honey badger. In March 1913, District Commissioner N. E.F. Corbett reported having a glimpse of what he thought was a Nandi bear. He described it as lightly built, with thick, reddish-brown hair, with a slight streak of white down the hindquarters, rather long from hock to foot, rather bigger than a hyena, with largish ears. From his description, Heuvelmans felt that he had seen an African hunting dog, Lycaon pictus. Another anomalous Nandi bear, reported from the Kipsenoy River by Charles Stoneham and described as having a pig-like snout, an enormous tail, and large circular ears, is considered likely to have been an aardvark. Stoneham himself thought it was a mutant aardvark. To explain the shaggy, slope-backed animals often described as giant hyenas, many cryptozoologists have turned to the fossil record. Bernard Heuvelmans, in his original examination of the case, felt that a good identity would be some form of giant baboon, perhaps similar to the prehistoric Deinopithecus, based on the animal's appearance and behavior as well as its reported gait, which was identical to the pithecoid gallop of monkeys. The Mao, Nandi, and Wa-Pokomo people described the Nandi bear as an ape or an enormous baboon, and some early investigators such as Captain Hickens and A. Blaney Percival also theorized that the brute may be a monkey. Giant baboons, far larger than any known species, have also been reported from East Africa independently of the Nandi bear. See The Menagerie of Marvels, a third compendium of extraordinary animals, 2014, by Carl Schuker. Perhaps the most well-known theory, first proposed by Charles William Andrews in 1924 and later supported by Louis Leakey, is that it may be a living chalicoth, a horse-like animal with a sloping back. This theory originated with the discovery of very recent chalicothere bones in Uganda, and the observation that chalicotheres were contemporaneous with the ancestors of the okapi, which famously still exists in the Congo's Ituri rainforest. Chalicotheres, however, were herbivorous animals, though they may have been aggressive, and were presumably slow-moving. In light of the Nandi bear's hyena-like attributes, which are especially apparent in the most recent accounts, Carl Schuker has suggested that it may represent a living relative of the short-faced hyena, Pachycircuita brevirostris, which was larger than any modern hyena and is known to have lived in East Africa until the late Pleistocene. Almost all of the more recent Nandi bear sightings describe the animal as a giant hyena, in popular media. The Nandi bear was featured in Gold Key Comics Tarzan No. 134, March 1963, in a story called The Hunting of the Beast, in which it is battled by Tarzan. Although portrayed as a bear-like animal, with long ears, like Thingoloko, it is referred to as a chalicothere. This version of the Nandi bear also appeared in Gold Key Comics Korak, Son of Tarzan No. 28, April 1969, in which Korak rescues a race of miniature people from it. The Nandi bear appears on card number 29 of the Weird and Wild Monsters of the Mind card set. Oddly, it is depicted as having only a single eye, like a cyclops, in the center of its brow. The chemosid appears as a magical beast in the Pathfinder role-playing game, where it is depicted as a 9-tall, half-ape, half-bear creature with black fur. Like the real Nandi bear, the chemosid is said to eat its victims' brains and to have a terrifying roar. The Malawi terror beast, a large, man-eating, hyena-like animal reported from Malawi, has some similarities with the Nandi bear. Patrick Bowen and Frank Lane theorized that attacks carried out by the Mngwa, a feline cryptid, could be blamed on the Nandi bear.